Hello, my name is Rinon, and today I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things that you can do to improve yourself as a healer in Final Fantasy XIV when you're about to go into raid progression of either a Savage or an Ultimate fight, or even if you're trying to do like Extreme Primals Day 1 or something like that. Raiding can often be quite a daunting task in this game, and blind prog is even scarier. I'm sure everyone gets a bit nervous before a raid tier comes out and they're about to go into progression. There's a lack of guides available, and at that point you're going to be solely relying on yourself to figure out what can often become fairly complex strategies to solve mechanics. The game never really teaches you how to play well, so you have to search out for resources on Discord servers, or you have to work through word of mouth in order to improve, and honestly it's a bit overwhelming, I think. So here are a couple of tips that, when I took them into consideration, drastically improved my gameplay as a healer when I was progressing fights for the first time. And honestly, I think they're definitely worth bearing in mind for any healer that is looking to combat future Savages or even Ultimate fights in the first few weeks of release. Or even if you're just looking to become a more rounded player who understands the game a little better and some of the nuances, this will be useful for you. So yeah, let's get into it. The first thing is to over-mitigate at first, always. You're not going to have a real feel for the damage output of the boss, or in most cases any idea what's going to await you in the future mechanics of the fight, especially during the first few pulls of Savage content. As a result, you want to make it a goal to keep people fully topped and shielded at all times when you don't know what's about to happen. And whenever you see a new cast bar that you haven't seen before, or you don't know what's going to happen as a result of it, you want to make sure that you have additional party mitigation stacked, so that no matter how much damage comes out, you have a good shot at surviving. Even if you do the mechanic incorrectly, there's a good chance that your party is going to live, or at least someone is going to live and be able to recover the fight. There's a simple reason for this. Your job in progression isn't to kill the boss, at least not initially. Your job is to gain as much information as possible, as quickly as possible. And the reason you want to do this is because then you can figure out solutions to mechanics in between pulls quickly and efficiently. And the best way that you can do this is to make the most of every single pull. You want to keep at least somebody alive for every single second that you can. There's no guarantee that you're going to survive until these defensive cooldowns become available again. They're going to go on cooldown for 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and let's be real, it's a very, very rare situation when you're going to see 2+ minutes further into the fight than you last did. So there's not really any loss to just popping them for the short-term gain rather than the potential that they might help you later. I think it's definitely a much better idea just to use them. This can pay dividends in some lucky cases. There are definitely times where you can brute force parts of fights completely and consistently get through them without even having to know what the mechanic is. You don't need to know how it works, you don't need to know how to resolve it, because you've just healed through it, doesn't matter. Your defensive ability is good enough to let you skip it. Even when that doesn't happen, you're more likely to be able to understand what you have to do going into the next pull, and you can come at it more prepared. You can have a chat with your group and you can figure out a plan of action, and that's how you make quick progression as a team. You essentially want to make it as easy as possible for your group to gain as much valuable information as possible from each and every pull. The second thing is to know your group composition. As a healer, you're often going to be one of the 2 players that has the most influence on how your group presses their defensive utility, because you and your co-healer are constantly watching HP bars and you're constantly paying attention to just how hard various attacks hit you for. You're uniquely positioned to be able to reduce the stress of that damage on yourself by knowing what your group is capable of and telling them when and where to use it effectively. Often other roles, especially DPS players, aren't really focused on their mitigation abilities as much as you or a tank would be, and they'll either push them mindlessly or in some cases not at all. And one easy way to make a progression environment a lot smoother for you is to know what every single class in your group is capable of and to ask them to use it when it helps you. So these are some of the ones that you should care about. Melee DPS have access to Feint, which reduces a target's strength by 10%, and it's very, very useful for reducing the damage that you take from an auto attack or from a physical tank buster. Monk also has access to Mantra, which increases healing received by 10% for 15 seconds, and it can be used to easily buff your raid-wide healing for incoming damage. Ranged DPS all have the same skill with different titles, namely Shield Samba, Troubadour, and Tactician. These skills flat out reduce damage taken by 10% and should be absolutely applied to heavy group damage. Bard also has Nature's Min, which can be used on a team member and increases the amount of healing they receive by a massive 20%. This can either be used on the current main tank to provide them with extra healing from auto attacks, something like an Adloquium or a regen will get a big buff from Nature's Min, or alternatively, if you pop it on the Scholar when they have a planned spread Adlo, you can buff the strength of that shield even further. Dancer has two unique skills that are really useful for raid groups. Curing Waltz, which is a pretty useful instant AoE heal. It's got a tiny range, but if you pair it with a healer skill, you can rapidly top the group up. It's very, very effective. And additionally, they have Improvisation. Improv is only really good around a tiny distance from the Dancer, and it has to be channeled to stay useful, but it increases the healing received by the party, and it also builds the Dancer's gauge, and it's excellent to help in mitigating during downtime or when you're stacked as a group. Casters can use Addle, which is absolutely a godsend. Addle reduces incoming magic damage by 10%, and as I'm sure we all know, magic damage makes up a massive percent of the hits that you're going to take in raids. This one is a big one that you want to be mapping out constantly. Red Mage also has a little bit of a special spot here because it has access to instant reviving on demand as long as you have enough MP thanks to dual cast, and this is imperative for progression. If you have a Red Mage in your party, they should be the first person rezzing a dead party member during prog, in order to allow the healers to conserve their MP and run triage on the group when things go wrong. Tanks have access to Reprisal, which reduces damage dealt by the boss by 10% as long as it's up. This skill is another incredible one. It's on a very, very low 60-second cooldown, and you have two of them, because you've got two tanks. You can use this skill to cover almost every single major raid damage in every single piece of content, and sometimes the tanks can even use them for a personal cooldown. It's such a universal skill, and it's so useful. Paladin has Passage of Arms, which is another channeled skill, and it reduces incoming damage by 15% as long as you've got it up. It's really good for intermissions, and it's also really good for sections where the group can easily stack for a big hit. One thing to remember about Passage of Arms is that if a paladin presses the button and then stops channeling it immediately, you still have that buff for 5 seconds. So you can have the paladin press the Passage of Arms button late into the cast bar of a big raid damage and then drop it immediately, so it ends up at no loss for the DPS of the paladin, and it ends up at a big gain for the mitigation of the group. On top of that, they have Divine Veil, which gives the group a shield upon healing the paladin. Warrior has Shake It Off, which is another skill that gives the group a shield, but this one is a little bit different to Paladins because it has no healing requirement to proc, and interestingly, the thing about Shake It Off is that you can buff it based on which cooldowns the warrior has live at the moment. Gunbreaker has Heart of Light, which reduces magic damage taken for 15 seconds. This skill is amazing, and it shines during short periods of multiple raid damage hits one after another, and it allows the mitigation to cover every single hit. A really good example of this is at the end of the Alexander Prime phase of T. You're going to take a lot of raid damages one after another, and whereas something like Shake It Off would break after a single hit, Heart of Light is going to last for 5-6 of those hits. Dark Knight has Dark Missionary, which is essentially the exact same as Heart of Light from Gunbreaker. I do however think that the Blackest Night needs an honourable mention here as raid utility. This skill is broken. It's genuinely so good. The cooldown is almost non-existent, it provides a massive single target shield on the target at the cost of a little bit of mana, and you can get the DPS loss from that mana back if you use it at a good time. This can save runs regularly during blind progression and easily as well, sometimes giving the healer a TBN when you have access to healer LB and you see a cast bar that you don't know what is going to happen. That can allow your party to progress, see through the next mechanic, keep the healer alive, everyone else dies, the healer can healer LB then, and then you can get everybody up and you can see further and further into the fight, and it's absolutely free. Blackest Night gives you some massive gains for very little cost during progression. Once you know what composition your group will be running with, you're going to know which skills you have access to, and you know which skills you can ask your group to apply to certain situations. This is one of the most important jobs that healers have to do during progression that I feel that some of them neglect. You don't want to be passive, you want to be taking an active role in the mitigation planning of the group. Even giving your group members general rules for popping their mitigation independently can be a really good idea. As an example, you could say, in Ramu, The caster can pop Addle, if you have it available, whenever you see the caster Judgment Jolt. Whenever you know that that raid damage is coming in, just pop it. And from then on they'll be able to do it independently, and they'll be able to use their mitigation in a way that works for you. The next one is to manage your mana. Managing your mana during a blind progression setting is completely different to doing it on farm. While the same general rules may apply in a lot of situations, such as things like keeping your lucid dreaming on cooldown, there's a lot more to consider here. You're going to be using a lot more mana than normal because you'll be overhealing and over-mitigating during blind prog a lot. So you're going to ensure that you need to find a balance between healing and keeping a healthy mana economy as soon as possible. This is really important if you don't want to run out of MP during prog, which trust me, you don't. Astrologians can especially suffer from this problem. You always want to have a quote-unquote bank of sorts of 3,000–4,000 MP in case a player dies or you need to heal a lot for something unexpected. So once you're comfortable with a phase, what you want to do is peel back some of those heals and rely a little more on your co-healer or a little more on your group mitigation to accommodate that if you run into persistent issues. One thing to use if you aren't already is mana potions. I always bring a massive stack of super ethers into blind progression with me, and I pop them with absolute reckless abandon. Almost every pull during the first few pulls of progression I'll be popping mana potions. My co-healer dies and I need to do a lot of extra healing to keep the pull alive, mana potion. I die, mana potion. We're entering a phase that we haven't seen yet and my mana isn't looking great, mana potion. Adding mana potions to your lucid dreaming and your natural MP economy can make things so much easier to deal with, and in a lot of cases in early prog they're going to gain you so much more than a tincture ever could. Of course, when you're a lot more comfortable with most of the fight and you're seeing the latter phases, you're going to want to swap over to tinctures to make sure that your group has the best chance possible to beat the enrage. So remember not to rely on them too heavily for too long. The next thing is to communicate clearly. One thing that I notice so many groups do is saying unnecessary things, not giving enough quiet time for the important or urgent callouts to be made, or generally arguing. While things like mechanical callouts are essential, it's not important for a group to know that somebody fucked up their opener, or that they missed a positional, or what you ate for dinner that night. Those discussions can take place in between pulls or when you're on farm. When you're progressing, you don't want to do anything that can cause potential harm to your progression through the fight. As a healer, there are definitely a couple of things that you should be calling out for your group in order to get the most out of them. Here's a couple of examples. One is calling out mitigation. A really good example of the importance of this is during Golden Bahamut in UCOB. A simple war cooldowns on Troubadour, call out for a Mornafar, can make or break a pull when the group doesn't really have a lot of experience in the phase, and if you're able to comfortably do things like this, they will definitely help the other players in your group feel at ease and remember their mitigations, and that's going to keep you alive. The next one is asking for help. If there's incoming damage that you know that you can't deal with, ask for help. Maybe your co-healer or another player in the group can make the hero play and save the run, but that potential is drastically reduced if you don't tell them that you need help in the first place. Calling res. You're going to want to make a res priority for your group, which is going to decide who will be the first port of call when it comes to reviving, and you're going to want to call out what you're doing when a player dies to avoid any confusion. If you're first on the res priority, call out resing or no swift. If your co-healer also calls out no swift, you know that you've got to hardcast it. Call out hardcasting to make sure that the group knows that the res is being done and your co-healer knows that they don't need to waste their GCDs doing it as well. The last one may be a bit controversial, but I hope not. You are expected to DPS from the very first pull. This is a simple but underappreciated point. You should be pushing out as much DPS as possible immediately from the very first pull, and constantly considering how you can safely deal more and more damage on a pull by pull basis. After all, I think it's pretty commonly said that the best mitigation is to kill the boss before it can do mechanics. If you're able to optimize your damage enough as a group, you may be able to skip certain awkward parts of the fight entirely, or at the very least remove issues that you may have with the boss enraging. I talked a little bit about over-mitigating mechanics at first earlier on in the video, as well as ensuring that the party's topped and shielded whenever you go into a new phase. And this is definitely true, but once you become comfortable with a phase and your party can execute it pretty consistently. It's really important that you peel back that mitigation, you remove the overhealing, and you only keep the essentials. You want to give the party a survival buffer, and then you want to redistribute those over-the-top defensive cooldowns to later parts of the fight, and you want to redistribute those unneeded healing GCDs into damage. When you're getting closer to the end of the fight, you want to peel back those mana potions and replace them with tinctures, to make sure that you're lining your raid buffs with those of your teammates, and you want to make sure that you're utilising your off-global abilities to allow you to pump out extra damage GCDs at every single stage of the fight. So these are just a couple of the tips that I think you should take into consideration when you're progressing a new fight as a healer. There are obviously going to be a lot more that can help you become a more rounded player, and these are all healer specific and not really just blind proc specific. So I'm sure that from your experiences you found others that other people can learn from. So if you let me know in the comments if you have any suggested tips of your own, maybe I'll make another video like this in the future. If you ever want to watch healer POVs, I stream pretty regularly on twitch.tv, the link's in the description below. So thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.